So just a couple of things. This is a public meeting, so just a reminder, it will be recorded. Also, I am Rachel MacArthur. You all are used to Bridget running this. Bridget Budbill has since moved on from CJC to another agency. So I'm a policy analyst at CJC, and I have taken this over. It's been a couple of weeks for me to kind of get familiar with this program, and I am definitely recognize that I'm coming in a bit late. I know you all have had a few meetings already. So please, as we go through this, just give me some grace as I try to catch up to this meeting and to the ones that are going forward. You know, if you have any questions or anything like that, and I don't know today, I'll definitely get back to you. We are hopefully at the end of this going to have some discussion because we do have a timeline that we just received that I do want to discuss with you all. So just kind of just ask for some patience from me as I try to just become a little bit more familiar with this program and what the work that you all have been doing so far. So I am going to do roll call really quickly. This is the summary. We do have 3 presentations scheduled today, as well as a conversation about the next steps. I attended a webinar this week with NCJA, and they gave us a little bit of a timeline that I want to be able to provide to you all so that we can make some decisions in terms of continuing informational meetings, but also getting to the point where you all are able to prioritize these funds. So I do want to have that conversation today so that we know going forward how often we have to have meetings and what those are going to look like. So just real fast, I will do roll call just to see who's here, and then we'll get going. Emily Watson.
I am present.
Awesome. Let's see, Judge Simmons. Jeff House.
I'm here, thanks.
Jen Fraga. If I say your name wrong, I apologize as well. Is Jen here? Jess Marks.
Here, thank you.
Let's see here. Kathleen Carlson.
I'm here. Thank you.
Laura Chisholm.
Hello, I'm here.
I got your email, Laura, so we'll get through this. Lori Palmer. Okay, let's see. Nicole Morrissey O'Donnell.
I am here, thank you.
Thank you. Peter Klim. I don't think Rep Boyce is here or Rep Reynolds. I think they've both indicated they're not going to be here today. Let's see, Shannon Civil.
I'm here.
Perfect. Okay, and then Vince Jones Dixon. Okay, we will get started then. I believe the group from DOJ is here. Did I see you all? Alexis and Nathalie, are you all here?
That's affirmative.
Okay, I will stop presenting then. And go ahead.
So you, Nathalie.
You missed my text and I'm like, hey, do you want to go first? Well, hi all, it's fun to see you and it's fun to see some familiar faces on this as well. And so Alexis and I are happy to share what our process has been. So DOJ received $15 million in ARPA money for community violence intervention. And we started work on that. This is at the start of end of 2022. Is that right, Alexis?
Yeah.
and got the money out in 2023. And I would say one thing that we really focused on was doing community outreach. And so from the moment we started this work in December of 2022, we were hot and out there as far as being able to find people who hadn't previously been funded by the Department of Justice, and really looking for people who were doing work around community violence intervention, even if they didn't necessarily know at that point that that's kind of a lens that the work they were doing can be seen through in that way. And so we scoured nonprofits all over the state, really wanting to distribute the money statewide, and held a tri-county meeting with probably 60 or 70 people in attendance and more online up in the Portland area. We did many one-on-ones with organizations across the state, virtually telling them about the grant opportunity. We had ongoing weekly opportunities for people to drop in and find out about it, because we really wanted to find those organizations that hadn't normally been funded by state grants for this kind of work before, and think that we were really successful in being able to do that. Of the 64 grantees we have, about 60 of them had never been funded through the Department of Justice before. And they're doing restorative justice work, they're doing mentoring, and a host of other activities. And so anyway, Alexis, what would you, so the $15 million we got out by, our application opened up in spring of 2023. And by July, we had selected who was going to be funded, and then after the biennium started, we're able to get the funding out to folks. Alexis, what would you add to that?
So our goal was trying to figure out something that hadn't been started yet. The concept behind community violence intervention and what it looks like on a state level hadn't been addressed yet in Oregon. Various other states have. So that meant finding out what was needed, what was going on. That meant checking out stats along with the community outreach we were doing, figuring out what the violence rates were, what the violence was attributed to in those particular counties, because you have certain counties where gun violence is actually attributed to suicide versus actual mass violence or interpersonal violence. And so we actually looked at that. Our goal was, and still is to actually connect these folks on a bigger level. We are currently in the process of building a summit for those 64 individual or organizations that we're working with, in order to, one, get them together so they know what everybody else is doing. Because one of the bigger things that's going on in Oregon is the work is siloed. And so what we're trying to do is put everybody in contact with somebody who knows somebody else. Because across the state, you know full well, with the major highways, I-5, 84, and whatnot, that's how folks travel throughout the state. They need to know where those resources are when you get further up I-5, when you get further east, and that sort of thing. So our goal was to find out what was going on where and try to focus on it. Now, that was a wide one, but it was actually quite effective, because we got to work with after-school programs, we're working with youth, we got to work with reentry programs, we got to work with job programs, we got to work with folks who were we got to work with mentoring particularly for women, mentoring particularly for men in particular. And so the idea was to try to get as far reaching as we can to find out what was needed. And so we're more or less of just casting a net to find out what we grab, what we can bring back, and what we can do the next time around.
We added in people with providing reentry services as well. And then also we reached out to people with lived experiences, and not, as being a victim of gun violence, but also perpetrators of gun violence. And we're able to work with them and their organizations around the work they're doing in the communities to help fund people with lived experiences committing harm as well.
And so with that, we have a very odd connection with the rest of the fund countries we're working with, because we're actually working with, well, for lack of a better term, abusers in this situation. There's a possibility of that. And so the language has to be interpreted differently, because we're actually working with folks who are product of the system, our product society and what's going on. So we still are working with them. So you still have to understand there's a large level of empathy that has to be done, even when working with these folks as well. And so that's the piece. I grew up in Portland. This is where I'm at. And so connecting with the communities of color here and what that looks like and building something a little bit more is a long-term goal, just based on understanding the gaps and services that are going on. And most of those gaps have to do with just the silo type of work that we're doing. And so Nathalie and I have had far-reaching connections as far as we can with ports across the state to figure out what's going on and how we can be of use to that. I'd say we just got through the second reporting phase. Folks are starting getting the run with it. We're also in the process of building a monthly series of trainings for these folks. So they get monthly trainings around nonprofit work. So we're building infrastructure with these folks as well. So we're not just saying, here's some money, do it. No, we're saying, here's some money. Let's help you also figure out how to stay open. Let's get you past that 3 to 10 year window that nonprofits usually run. And so that's everything from bookkeeping to time tracking to development. And it's a 10 series process for over the month. And that's part of what we're providing to them. So they're not being charged for this. We're providing this. And so it's been a great experience. I think we've learned a lot about what we can do and where we can improve upon. So it's been great.
You may have mentioned this in the beginning, but do you have another round? Like, is the grant going to continue coming up, or was it kind of a one-time thing?
Thank you. The first round was 15 million in ARPA funds, and so that funding and that grant cycle will go through the end of this calendar year. And then it was great because we also received state funding for community violence intervention, $10 million in state funding. And so that application will go out this summer and will take us through until the next biennium. And so for that one, we're still working, with the 15 million ARPA, we were able to kind of fund a wide raft of activities and services that were going on. And we're having discussions now around what that will look like for this next pot, take into account that it's not as much money as the first time. That said, I don't want to discount that what's so exciting about this is that we have state money going forward for this, which is really exciting. So.
And do you all anticipate the same number of grantees, or do you anticipate more? Because that's always the rub, right? When it's going well,
yeah,
and you get less money, but you may have more. Like, is there?
There could be more. There could be more applicants. I don't know that there would be more people who get funded, since it's about 2/3 of the money. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, Jess.
Thanks for your work and thanks for sharing. And I think it's especially great to hear about the ongoing training that you'll have been doing. I was wondering if you could talk about, how I understand community violence is that it's not, for example, domestic violence. So it's talking typically often about gun violence, that it, happening between non-intimate partners, typically in public places. But, in Oregon, from a data perspective, that Black and Latino and tribal communities are most impacted by gun violence. So I'm curious how you've thought about prioritizing funding to meet the needs of those communities who are most impacted.
We prioritize those fundings. I mean, all around. CVSSD is currently in the process of doing a more global concept of prioritizing priority populations, as I like to use the term. So that is just a piece of what we're doing. We understand that I live in this community, so I fully have a full understanding of what those differences are and the outreach that's necessary to those pieces. I connect, I do community outreach on my own. I make myself a fixture in some of these places. It is something that has to be done, but at the end of the day, we have to actually look at the whole global picture. But that's always the first thing we look at, because I know full and well the community that I grew up in is not any better than it was 40 years ago. I'm 51 years old. I've been in Portland. I'm a fourth generation or Black Oregonian. Trust me, I understand what focus is in this state. We will definitely get that.
Any other questions for us? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Yeah, I was just checking in to see if there are other questions that we can address.
Hi, Nathalie. Hi, Alexis. This is Kathleen. Sorry I'm not live. I'm driving and trying to talk at the same time. But I was wondering what plans there were for evaluation of the outcomes of all of this amazing work.
So that's been my piece. And one of the things I've done is I've spent the better part of the last 6 months just pulling data from every state CBI thing that's going on, John Hopkins, you name it, I pulled it to try to figure out what is it that we're actually measuring? What is it that folks are trying to measure and what it is they claim they're going to be able to get the outcome? And that's been a very thin line. And so what we've learned from this first time around is the impact is not something we're actually going to be able to measure by numbers. We have to be told what that impact is. That impact has to come from the people who we serve and how they describe to us what's changing in their community. All the numbers in the world will say, yeah, we're affecting this one, but it doesn't actually show the impact of where we're going with this. And so the idea is to provide them with the right way to present to us what that impact is. What do you plan to do? What are your plans are? It's embedded in the way the application's written. It's embedded in the way that the progress reports are written. So the idea is that it's a rolling thing. It's not a one-time thing, or it's not just a, oh, we're going to do this. This is the only thing we're doing. We're done. Where is this process going? Because like social justice, it's an evolving process. This will be an evolving process.
Thank you. That makes so much sense. Really like that approach.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to the next presentation? Okay, thank you two so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. You're free to go. Okay, so we initially had a few presentations and there've been a bit of a change. So I believe it's Laura who's going to present now. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm going to be doing my very best to channel Roy and Molly and Catherine, who I've been working with pretty closely on this project. But yes, I am neither Roy nor Catherine nor Molly. I'm Laura Chisholm. I'm going to go on camera really briefly. I apologize. I'm recovering from a concussion, and so I'm sitting in a dark room with dark glasses on. So I'm going to be off camera because there's not much to look at this point anyway. So, and I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And these are full disclosure. I found a slide deck from Roy that from a presentation that he gave last summer. So this is a little out of date, but I think it will help you get the gist of the Healing Hurt People program. And so, in my understanding of the sort of the charge for today's meeting in general is to make sure that we all have a kind of a broader understanding of what the context within which we will be making these sort of allocation decisions. Is that right, Rachel? So yeah, so just trying to provide some context, both from the community perspective in terms of the Healing Hurt People program that Roy so ably directs, and also some work that's been happening at OHA. And hopefully Molly Taylor will be joining us at some point here. I know she's in a meeting with the folks at CMS. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I think I figured out how to make this go full screen as well. Control L. Is that working? Hey, look at that. So are you getting my full screen orange? And yes, wonderful. So these are Roy's slides. And I will actually fully introduce myself. I'm Laura Chisholm. I use the she, her pronoun series. And I am privileged to get to work at the Oregon Health Authority within the Public Health Division, and I manage the Injury and Violence Prevention program there. And until relatively recently, we'd been mostly injury prevention and didn't really have much funding for violence prevention. So I'm going to be talking to you today about just briefly sharing information about the Healing Hurt People program in Portland, and then also about the work that's been happening in OHA and also in collaboration with POIC um, to help develop hospital-based violence intervention programs outside of the Portland area as well. So that's my hope for today. So Healing Hurt People, I believe, began in around 2019. And so the Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center is an amazing nonprofit. If you're not familiar with their work, check them out. They do incredible work, mostly in North Portland, with the Black community, and they have been just incredibly successful on a variety of fronts. They run a couple of high schools and just do some really incredible work. And this project, Healing Hurt People, started up as originally they were working with Legacy Emmanuel. They are now partners with OHSU, and I believe that the third partner now is Adventist out in East Portland. And so this whole idea was trying to reduce the cycle of community violence by supporting I've heard it described really nicely as supporting the sort of the emotional and psychological healing needs of people who have experienced a shooting and, were a victim of a shooting. And so, obviously there's the physical healing that needs to happen, but there's the other part of the healing that needs to happen that really involves family and community and really requires a real wraparound of services for folks. So Healing Hurt People focuses on credible messengers. And so it's people with lived experience who are trained professionals who are dispatched to the bedside of a person who's been shot. POAC focuses in the Portland area, and I believe their main group of focus is Black men aged, I think, 20-ish to 40. And if I don't have that quite right, I apologize. But it's basically Black men who are their major group that they're working with. And so they'll have credible trained messengers who get dispatched to the bedside within 4 hours of the incident. And so they're there really soon to help provide sort of just immediate triage and support, and then are available kind of on a case management basis for up to 18 months following the incident of violence. So this Healing Hurt People originally started at Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, and then it transitioned to POIC in 2018. There's a lot of text here, but really focusing on best practices. That 4-hour window post-trauma is really important in terms of the ability to help support the victim really immediately, as soon as they possibly can after an incident of violence. It's heavily trauma informed and really addresses physical, social, emotional needs after being released from the hospital as well. So really kind of looking from this as a public health approach, and to really help people land on their feet. And I love this last little paragraph. It says, when victims are at the crossroad without proper guidance, they'll most likely choose the road most familiar to them. And Healing Hurt People strives to guide these wayward travelers down a road of reform and not retaliation. So this is a model. It started at Drexel University or on the East Coast, and has been studied quite a bit. I know that there are a number of studies ongoing, but outcomes that are connected with this type of program include reduction in repeat emergency room visits, rearrests, and retaliatory violence, and then also reduction in development of acute stress and PTSD. So I know Roy has some really great perspective that he brings to this presentation as a person from the community and a person with lived experience. He has shown some really great data on their program. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but really, this slide talks about the services that they provide. It's multidisciplinary, and the folks who are the credible messengers who are working with the victims of violence are embedded within the care team at the hospital. And so there's a very strong relationship that's developed between POIC as the organization that's providing the peer support folks and the hospital. And so it's a really interesting partnership that develops between community-based organization and a hospital. So then I'll share these slides so that you can have a closer look at this, because I know we are short on time today, but they'll help with relocation services. If somebody's really, a lot of these times folks are in situations that are continuing to be really dangerous for them and their families. And so POIC will help to relocate families out of state. They provide other kinds of support services, temporary hotel stays. They get referrals for therapy, counseling, addiction recovery services, behavioral health support, family needs, so helping with, if there's food insecurity, if people need help with documentation for employment, and lots of different kinds of transition and recovery support in terms of education, connecting into work referrals and job readiness programs. So there's a really broad array of services that are provided by Healing Hurt People. Here are some stats. You can see that the blue, it's interesting, it says 50, 50, 50. I think that means 33, 33, 33, but a third of the folks in this time frame, this was July 21 to June 22, a third of the folks who'd been shot were identified as people of color, a third were white, and then the other third were unknown. So you can see there's this incredible, there's a very large and disproportionate impact upon particularly the Black community in Portland. And this is a little breakdown of some data on some demographics of the folks who've been served. And I apologize, I'm moving through this pretty quickly, but hopefully you're getting the basic idea here. It's a highly trauma-informed program, very based on relationship development and realizing that addressing trauma is crucial in terms of healing and breaking the cycle of violence. And so, obviously a lot of folks who come to these situations have experienced a high degree of trauma previously. So and then these incidents of violence are particularly life-altering. And so this is a really kind of an amazing opportunity to help intervene at a really, really vulnerable time. So I think that's the end of Roy's presentation. So I'm going to stop trying to channel him and channel other folks that I work with. But while I'm switching slides, are there any questions immediately? Okay, well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and talk to you about the perspective that I'm a little more familiar with from the Oregon Health Authority. And there are three of us who've been working really closely on implementation of House Bill 4045, which was passed in the short session 2 years ago. I will give a lot of credit to Roy and his team at POIC, who did some amazing advocacy for this program, and our Governor Kotek, who was at that time the Speaker of the House and actually introduced the bill. So House Bill 4045 provided funding to expand capacity for programs like Healing Hurt People, not only in the Portland area by directly funding POIC, but also establishing new programs elsewhere in the state, recognizing that community violence is a big problem in Portland, a big issue, but it's also an issue elsewhere in the state, and that it actually looks really different in different communities. So there were a number of things in this bill. My colleague Molly Taylor has been working really hard to work on a package to enable Medicaid billing for Healing Hurt People services. And OHA was also charged by this bill to develop professional standards for community violence prevention peers, those credible messengers that I was just talking about. And then also addressing risk factors and supporting protective factors related to community violence. So POIC has been doing a lot of this work. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of theirs because I'd love if you all have a chance to hear directly from POIC about their grant program. I think that would be time really, really well spent. And maybe we can set something up for an upcoming meeting. But the work that we've been doing at OHA has been this, a lot of the more behind the scenes work to get Medicaid billing set up. And then there was an initial allocation of $1.5 million to POIC back in 2022 to increase the capacity of the Healing Hurt People program in Portland. And I know there was a further allocation in the current biennium. I think it was a little less, but they are being directly funded by state dollars. House Bill 4045 also allocated $1 million to OHA to provide grants to hospitals and community-based organizations to grow the Healing Hurt People program or programs like that outside of Multnomah County in particular. And so the bill enabled OHA to provide a grant program that would support planning and identification of community needs, provider training and certification, and also just general capacity building for these programs. And really, a lot of what needs to happen immediately is partnership development. And one of the things that Molly has been working really, really closely with is doing a lot of outreach to community-based organizations. Very grateful to Nathalie and Alexis and their team, because they've really helped connect us to a lot of folks across the state who are doing similar work. Of course, my cat now really wants to come in the room. So if you're hearing some kitty noises in the background, that's what's going on. Just uncanny timing. So community-based organizations, as I mentioned from Roy's presentation, they recruit, train, and support the violence prevention professionals, the credible messengers, and then also would need to develop a partnership with hospitals to be the providers of services for Healing Hurt People or similar programs, and then would also have the responsibility for billing Medicaid for services. And so this is a bit of a hurdle for community-based organizations. It's a very specific skill set in Medicaid billing. So Molly's been working, doing a lot of work to develop support and resources for CBOs that are interested in getting moving on these programs so that they too can develop more of a sustainable funding stream for their programs. So I mentioned the $1 million that came to OHA. We're planning on putting out a request for grant applications here within the next couple of months. We actually did put out an RFGA last May, and we did not get any applicants, and we learned a lot from that process. And since then, Molly's been doing a ton of outreach and has not only identified a lot of organizations that are interested in doing this work, but also helped to identify what some of the barriers were. And I think a lot of the CBOs were not truly believing that really what we were doing was wanting to fund them to be part of a learning community, to help understand what programs like Healing Hurt People, so community violence or hospital-based violence intervention programs, what really that entails, and what kind of a lift that would be for a community-based organization that's working to reduce violence in their community. So we're looking for CBOs that are either a nonprofit or have a 501c3 fiscal agent, or health systems that have at least one emergency department or urgent care facility that's serving people outside of Multnomah County. And the outside of Multnomah County was the way that this bill was written, recognizing that Healing Hurt People was mainly already working within Multnomah County. So really what we'll be asking applicants to do is to be part of a learning community that will be developing partnerships between CBOs and hospitals, exploring national best practices and standards, and trying to kind of work through what does that mean for Oregon and what does that mean for your specific community. So the timeline is we're hoping to get this out in early April. Later in April, we'll be reviewing applications, hopefully having the grant awards in May, and then beginning a community of practice in June. And we're working right now to develop a relationship with the HAVI, the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, which is a national organization that will provide training and technical assistance for the applicants. So I believe that's it. And hopefully we're in time to answer some questions. I know I really motored through that, but hopefully that gave you at least a high-level understanding of what's happening at OHA and also of the amazing work that's happening through POIC. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Laura. Does anybody have any questions about these two programs?
I do. Laura, great job presenting. I was wondering if by design the funding needs to go to a CBO that's aligned with the hospital, or is there ever the opportunity to fund like programs that are embedded in the hospital themselves? So hospital-based versus hospital-aligned, I guess.
Ooh.
It's sounding like you purposefully went with hospital-aligned programs.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And is that Kathleen?
Yeah, hi.
It sounded so much like you, but I couldn't quite tell. So I'm trying not to look at my screen. Yeah, it's a really interesting distinction, and let's actually talk more offline about that. I think we're in a little bit of an interesting place with that because the statute that provided, or the bill that's now in statute that provided the funding to us, does specifically mention community-based organizations. So I don't know that is specifically defined. And I think that we would need to talk with our contracts folks and probably the Department of Justice to make sure that we're getting a really clear reading of the intention of that statute so that we're, conforming with the letter of the law, obviously. But yeah, it strikes me that if there's an organization that's already sort of hospital-based and hospital affiliated, but that has the capacity to potentially be able to serve, in that same kind of capacity as an organization like POIC, to provide credible messengers and to help train folks up and to do the billing. Really, that's what we're looking for. So it's really, and it's enough. And I know you know a lot about these programs too, but it's a big enough lift. I think that's one of the things that's been challenging so far with this and trying to get CBOs interested in this is it just feels like a lot because it's a kind of a new, kind of a hybrid model it's medical, but so it's requiring the CBOs to kind of develop some new skill set in terms of training and certification of these folks, as well as doing the Medicaid billing, which is, as I understand, quite a Byzantine process just, requires a whole lot. So yeah, anyway, I feel like I'm just sort of riffing here, but it's a really interesting question. And I really appreciate you asking it because I think it's something we'll need to get very, very clear about.
Yeah, thanks.
Shannon, did you have a question?
I really just had more of a comment. I wanted to thank Laura for her presentation, and I also just wanted to let the folks on the call know that in the chat, I put the complete list of the programs that are funded with the DOJ CDI grant. POIC is actually one of them, but just so everybody would know, it's broken down by agency, purpose of the grant, dollar amount, and county that the program is serving, just for anyone's perusal if you want to take a look at that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions for Laura? Okay, Laura, thank you so much for being here, for filling in for Roy. I hope you feel better. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat. And yeah, happy to talk offline or online with anybody who has further questions or interest in this project. So thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, our last presentation is on specialty courts by Rachel, Mark, and Danielle, and I'll let you guys have it.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us. I'm going to pull up our slides because anybody who knows us, we can't live without a good slideshow, to hopefully run through a number of things. While I am grabbing that, I think what I'd want to start with is just emphasizing a change that we have experienced with our treatment court world. So as CJC often refers to our specialty court programs, you're going to hear Danielle and I talking about our treatment court programs. And that is one and the same when it comes to this conversation, but we realize that can trip people up. We've made that change. I'm recognizing it helps kind of better distinguish the programs and what it is that they're actually offering back to the community. There's some real benefit to that as far as just community buy-in goes, also being more open to funding opportunities and making sure that people know really what we're referring to when we talk about these programs. So just know if you hear different language at different times, they're kind of used interchangeably as of now. And with that, is this sharing properly? Can you see the full presentation? Cool. Okay. So hello, Danielle and I are here. I'm going to hand it over to her about halfway through, so I'll let her do her own intro. I'm Rachel Mark. We're both from the Oregon Judicial Department in the Office of the State Court Administrator, and we are both treatment court analysts. So as you can imagine, all of our work is specifically dedicated to working and supporting our treatment courts here in Oregon. So we wanted to do a couple of things for you today. We really appreciated the invitation and the opportunity to talk about treatment courts and how, if at all, that may relate to SCIP. And so wanted to really just zero in on what our goals are today. First and foremost, we didn't know exactly who our audience is, but always think it's helpful to start with a little bit of level setting on just giving some basics about the treatment court model itself, so that folks understand really what treatment courts are and also what they are not. And to hopefully inspire all of you to think through, if at all, how treatment courts may fit into your SCIP grant program as you're moving forward with that. So finally, with that consideration, what we wanted to be sure to pass along is if you are inclined to consider treatment courts as potential applicants, we have some suggestions about things that we think might be of increased importance to you given the goals of this grant program, or at least our current understanding of what those are. So with that, again, level setting. I'm not sure if you've all heard the good news, but treatment courts are a really widely used intervention in our justice system at this point. They're also one of the most researched justice system interventions, and time and time again, research has shown that treatment courts are incredibly effective. So this comes from All Rise. Those of you that have any familiarity with treatment courts probably heard of NADCP at some point. All Rise is just a new, their new branding for their organization. But treatment courts are considered the most successful justice intervention for people with substance use and mental health disorders. So first, we wanted to really emphasize it's this duality here. We're really looking at serving individuals who are involved in the justice system, but also these are targeting individuals that have substance use and or mental health needs. And good news, they actually work. So when we say they work, we mean that in two different ways. One is, while they can be cost heavy on the front end, we call them investments. What we know is that in the big picture, in the long run, there can be actual cost savings, or rather, as our boss likes to call it, cost avoidance. We're not necessarily saving money, but by people having less crimes, less access to use public resources, or need to use public resources in the future, that there is lesser cost to the system in the big picture. And then, of course, the other half of that, when we're thinking about public safety, that I think is so important, is also they're really effective at decreasing recidivism. So we're not only serving people based on what they need when they're before us in the justice system, but the work that's being done there actually has long-term benefits. These people are less likely to come back to the justice system with new crimes. That means less violence and less victims in the big picture, and hopefully a wholer, healed community in the big picture as well. So with that, our wonderful partners at the Criminal Justice Commission, who are tasked with doing kind of the oversight and studying of our treatment court programs, just finished their first recidivism study of Oregon's treatment court programs. This looked distinctly at our adult drug court programs, mental health, DUII, and our veteran treatment courts. But look what they found. Individuals who graduated from treatment court programs did not return to the justice system within 3 years of successfully completing their programs. So 75% is super, super impressive in and of itself when you think about any programming that's tied to the justice system. But here, let's compare that to the populations that they were also looking at. So 75% of graduates compared to 41% of individuals who might have entered the treatment court program but didn't actually complete it. So huge distinction there. We continue to widen that gap when we look at individuals who might have been referred to treatment courts but either chose not to enter or were not accepted. So when individuals enter these programs, get the interventions they need, and make it all the way through, there's some magic that happens with that prevents them from coming back to our system. So we're excited to share that because we haven't had this information for years, especially not specific to Oregon, so wanted to make sure to share that with you all. I don't think we need to spend too much time on this piece of it, but lots of people, there's obviously always conversations about where treatment courts fit into the system overall. And we know there's lots of conversations happening right now about different responses to individuals coming to the justice system. But we really wanted to reflect for you here is just that treatment courts are critical interventions that are needed in our justice system. They're court-based programs that are really designed to provide intensive services to high-risk, high-need individuals. Danielle's going to dig into that more in a bit. But because of the target population, because of the fact that the dosage is so high for this group, they're at the deep end of the continuum as far as kind of those court-based programs goes. They're not appropriate for everyone. They're very intense interventions that really need to be targeted towards the individuals that are identified by research as most appropriate to enter them. A little bit of a lay of the land. Here is a fun map one of our previous team members put together with all these cool icons, but it gives you an idea of where treatment courts are in Oregon and also kind of our current numbers. I always want to qualify this with the numbers are constantly changing. Generally, that's because new programs are coming up, unfortunately. We did have a few closures for adult drug court programs in 2023, but generally this number is changing because more and more treatment court programs are coming online all the time. So if you see this number now or you see this map and it looks different in a few months, that's because hopefully it means new programs are coming. But so overall, we have 66 treatment court programs in Oregon. We're not necessarily focused on talking too specifically about the court types overall, although we will dig into veteran treatment courts nuances a little bit. And then the rest of it, as we're talking about this conversation and where treatment courts may be appropriate to consider, that may be across different treatment court types. So more information to come on that as we move through the slides. One of the things that's important, this is embedded in the standards themselves, which I'll talk more about in a moment, but we just really wanted to stress part of the magic of a treatment court program is they're multidisciplinary by nature. So they're most successful and frankly only really a true treatment court program if they are multidisciplinary with these core roles coming together at the table. And we talk about this because there's really a need for a balanced approach. And what we know is we're better together. Typically, when everybody's coming from kind of a different lens, a different lane to kind of think through, we're getting our best thinking, our biggest thinking, we're considering all of the right things. And in this scenario, these are really the key players when we're talking about a treatment court program. So obviously it's a court program. The judge, a coordinator is somebody in this context who really does, spoiler alert, all of the coordination. But we like to call it kind of herding the cats. This is a person who pulls the team together, who maintains program documentation, who works on kind of keeping the program afloat from a funding perspective. They're really kind of orchestrating a lot of things behind the scenes. Then we have our prosecutors. I think y'all are familiar with their role. Aside from prosecution, really being inclined to think about public safety and victim restoration. Then, of course, our defense attorneys postured in kind of the opposite fashion to really look out for the best interest of that individual, ensuring due process is followed. Treatment. This is part of why we wanted to change the term from specialty courts to treatment courts. Treatment providers are an incredibly important part of our treatment court teams. They are delivering interventions directly to the participants, but they're also embedded in this team to be sharing updates on progress, concerns, and they're really poised to kind of pivot with their interventions based on what's happening with that individual. And then community supervision, by and large, that's representative of the probation role. I just want to acknowledge when we talk about family treatment courts, probation's not necessarily at the table. That would probably be more likely to be a DHS staff. But for this program, this context here, that's really likely going to be your probation team that's out doing the community supervision, reporting back, ideally following the risk need responsivity model, having lots of contacts with the individuals. And then sometimes a forgotten about critical team member, but a really, really important one is law enforcement. So this at times has been considered controversial, but what I think Danielle and I would both message on this, aside from just the beauty of kind of the public safety front, seeing people in the communities and making connections, there's also a real opportunity here to improve relationships across the participants or the general community and law enforcement, and really promote some healing and increased trust, which can be a really beautiful thing to see in action. So all of that, this group is tasked to come together really with a shared goal to supervise these individuals and provide the right treatment in the treatment court program from a non-adversarial perspective, but keeping in mind they also have their traditional roles to kind of balance with that. So it really ends up being this thing of beauty where everybody's coming in with different kind of angles, but hopefully looking to support the participant and promote public safety in the big picture. And where does all of this come from? Great question. Well, it comes from national research. We didn't make it up here in Oregon, although we do have more to say about that in a moment. But what we want you to know is this is an incredibly researched intervention. It comes from the All Rise Adult Treatment Court Best Practice Standards. There's several other publications that relate to treatment courts, but we wanted to just emphasize those best practice standards focus on 10 key areas. Target population is one of them that Danielle's going to dig into a little bit more specifically for you all shortly. These programs aren't for everybody, so we really want to make sure that they're for the right person. That's when they're effective, and we're really looking at public safety properly. Equity and inclusion is viewed as an obligation of our programs. This is not some extra thing that we maybe need to think about sometimes. It is an embedded standard of something we constantly have to think about. Who's getting into our programs? What are their experiences like while they're in our programs? And are people having equitable exits from our programs? And if not, what do we need to do to make sure that that is in fact what's happening? How we work with the judge is obviously a really, really important part of this. Behavior responses, treatment, they call them complementary services. So really addressing the whole human. What are other needs that maybe need to be addressed in order to get to criminogenic risk factors, et cetera? The new standards also built in the discussion around recovery capital, which is just such a beautiful strengths-based way of thinking about what do individuals need to be successful in the big picture. It's not necessarily having a probation officer for the rest of their life. It's having community that they're connected to. It's having financial resources to support their health and safety. And so that's really been now baked into part of the treatment court model, which is super exciting. Unsurprisingly, when we're talking about a substance use program, Drug and alcohol testing is a piece of it. We've talked about the multidisciplinary team. There's a whole piece of guidance around census and caseloads, kind of how many staff do you need per participant, all of that good stuff. And then a standard specific to monitoring and evaluation. There's a huge emphasis that our programs should be collecting data regularly, but then also reflecting on that data and making adjustments based on what we're learning so that we're always improving. So that is a super fast rundown on the basics. And now I'm going to hand it over to Danielle, who's going to talk about target pop and get into some other kind of more nuanced pieces.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Danielle Hansen. I use she, her pronouns, and tough act to follow with Rachel. So I'm going to kick some of the stuff back to her, where she does a really great job of emphasizing more of the work. But what we thought would be helpful for you today is to dive into a little bit more of the who we are serving and how programs are making that determination as it relates back to the research. You'll hear us use that term quite a bit, and to the best practices. And as Rachel said, we do have best practices specifically for Oregon that are guided off of the national model. And we think that's a really important piece to that chart of all of the different treatment court types that we serve in Oregon, and making sure that they're focused on and following the research. And so just a real quick snapshot of our target population. So what's really important in determining and figuring out what your target population is for your program, really regardless of our different treatment court types, is that it's defined and that the team knows what that criteria is. That team, when I talk about the team, Rachel did a great job of describing this multidisciplinary team approach. It's not just one person that's making that decision. And so in order for it to be objective, and we want it to be objective when we want it to be written down. So when you are working with your law enforcement partners to refer individuals to the program, they know what that criteria is. And so communicating that and then being proactive in recruiting, once you know what your eligibility criteria is that we're identifying those individuals as early on in the process as possible. We know that the sooner we can connect them with supervision, treatment, and services, the better. And that we're focused on the high risk, high need population. I'll dive into that just a little bit more, but just generally that risk, when we're talking about risk in the terms of treatment courts, we're talking about risk to committing new offenses or failing on supervision. So that standard supervision level of services. And then when we're talking about need, we're talking about moderate to high substance use disorder. And then we also have specific for our mental health courts, severe and persistent mental illness is that primary in that high needs category. And so validated eligibility assessments. So we don't want to guess in terms of who meets that criteria. We want to use those tools that give us that information and help us determine who is that high risk, high need, and who has that moderate to severe substance use disorder, and that we're not mixing. So if somebody isn't high risk and is low risk, it's really important that they're not in that same program, and that if programs are serving that other group, that they're keeping them separate. And then criminal history. So this is a big one, I think, that's helpful for you all, is when programs are considering who they're serving in their program, criminal history considerations are something that they can identify, and making sure that they can be served safely in the community. We're often diverting individuals from going to prison. And what does those criminal histories look like? And what does the program have for resources? And so that treatment and resource consideration is really important. We don't want to exclude individuals who have co-occurring disorders, which is a majority of the individuals that are coming into our programs. And that we want to have resources for medication-assisted treatment, for mental health, and resources in the community, and what we like to refer to that one-stop shop. So we're not saying go call this person and get that service, that we have it immediately in this treatment court team and program. All right, Rachel, next slide. So diving in a little bit more around how programs are considering who is eligible for the program. As we know that it's guided by research, which means the biggest bang for the buck is that high risk, high need person. Our programs are a minimum of 12 months long, and often are taking an average of 18 months to get through the program. And so it's really important that programs are focused on those individuals. It's going to cost more for someone that may not need a high level of supervision or a high dosage of treatment to be in our programs. That's not the right fit for them. And so it's important that programs know and are focused on that high risk, high need population, which is the individuals that I think we're talking about here today, but also specifically to as it relates to our programs in Oregon, in addition to this national model that in order to have it work in that multidisciplinary team style in the community, that there are some agreements and considerations that need to be in place. And so some programs have multiple types of justice reinvestment programs within their community. Treatment courts don't always work for everyone. And so depending on the availability of programs that they have can depend on who can get in. So some of that would include downward departure. So programs that have prison are only taking prison bound cases. Some have disqualifiers that don't allow them to take the violent offenses. It really is determined based off of those local dynamics. And so that legal incentive is a really important piece. As I said, it takes a long time and a lot of work. One of my judges, when I was a program coordinator in Lane County, used to say it was harder than completing law school and presiding over a treatment court. And so it's always a good reminder to me of who we are serving in our programs and the resources that we have. And then again, that resource availability is a really important piece. Rachel, did I miss anything that you want to jump in on? Okay, let's jump to the next slide. And then our exclusionary criteria. So I briefly touched on the criminal history disqualifiers, but the current charges is something that we want to emphasize on. Instead of having a rundown list of here's all the charge types that we do take, what we want programs to have is a smaller list of who they don't take in order to continue to be objective and to hopefully take as many people as we can and reduce those disparities for the programs. But we know that there are federal limitations for federal funding for our treatment courts to be able to take some violent offenses in our adult drug court programs. And that is something that we just wanted to highlight. But what the best practice to say is you can have those that exclusionary criteria, but we want you to also take a look at on a case-by-case basis who may be eligible if you can safely serve them in the community, which is where these violent offenses and some of these gun charges do come in, and we do see that programs are taking them. Multnomah County has a program that that's called STEP that does expand outside of that does take violent offenses, and Rachel is just going to touch a little bit on that, how that looks a little bit different than our other treatment courts.
Thanks, Danielle. So for those of you that have heard of the STEP program before, it's supervised treatment engagement program, I believe is what that stands for. I have the sticker on my water bottle and was trying to memorize it. But so it's the first in our state that does, it's a Measure 11 diversion program. We don't want to go too far into it. It's not a program to speak on behalf of, but we just got to watch it last week. And one of the kind of motivating factors behind this program was really thinking through an equity lens. The individuals who are ending up in prison based on Measure 11 offenses, where they have this mandatory sentence of prison time, was disproportionately impacting our communities of color. And so this was one of Multnomah County's responses to kind of look through an equity lens and also integrating the treatment court model into how to hopefully keep people safely in the community by using the risk need responsivity model and kind of looking at different ways to serve and supervise this population. And they're, I want to say about a little under 2 years of operation at this point. So still relatively new. But it was an important thing for us to highlight for you all, because while you see this exclusionary criteria slide, what the national guidance is telling us is there's no reason to think that individuals with violent charges are less likely to be successful in our programs. You just have to be able to serve and supervise them properly. Otherwise, you ought not take them. So STEP's really the first major leap for that in our state. But what we want you to know is there are programs who take individuals with violent offenses. And that's more prevalent in some program types than others. But it's not something that's going to play out like every program is going to look the same. It's really distinct from program to program and jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Danielle, do you want to say anything else on this slide, or you want me to keep moving?
keep moving, but I'll also just say that, emphasize that what the research does say, if you do have those disqualifiers for the history of violence or taking those violent offenses, it doesn't mean that you have better outcomes in your programs. And so the research is continuing to come out. And although, as we know, the federal side of things can take some time to catch up and change some of those limitations, we'll talk about that with our veterans treatment courts, but we are continuing to move in that direction, and that ideally our programs overall, we have this easy to get in to the program and hard to get out, which ties back to the recidivism study that Rachel talked about, that better outcomes if we get them to successful completion.
Why are we spending time talking about exclusion criteria? Well, this is an important piece for us, especially super exciting having heard your first two presenters today. One of the biggest challenges that I think Danielle and I faced as local treatment court coordinators, and then now moving into this state role, is that when we have excessive exclusionary criteria, we end up limiting certain groups of individuals. What we just saw from one of the previous presentations, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by gun violence. And so I'm just going to take that kind of simple statement that we heard over there and translate that over to, if our programs do have the resources to safely serve and support and supervise individuals in treatment court programs, that's an opportunity for us to kind of level the playing field and make sure that we're really looking at equity of access here. So exclusionary criteria is very important to us because we want to promote equity of access and make sure we're not perpetuating disparities within our programs.
And so the beauty of the treatment court model is that you do have all of those partners at the table, and having that is what creates that ability to increase the level of supervision and accountability, and making sure that the individuals that are staying in the community, that it is safe. And so some of that includes, we have the DA and the team, and although we didn't dive into talking more about what court looks like, but the programs are having conversations prior to court, what we call pre-court staffing, where they're talking about what's going on in the community, which includes safety, which includes any potential victim issues that is going on with and probation needing to increase levels of supervision. And so part of that is just there's a lot, right, between treatment and the accountability and drug testing and monitoring. And so our programs, by being all together and working together, integrating those case plans and targeting those areas of criminogenic risk and treatment, that clinical need side at the same time. And then it all comes together in this pretty little package, or the judge is able to monitor them and check in with them and have that oversight in addition to what's happening on the community supervision side. And then the public safety tools piece as well is there's having the contact restrictions. And, Rachel, we haven't even talked about our data. We have a statewide data system that allows our programs and our team members to communicate in real time, which is a best practice to be able to, you're not sending emails and waiting for responses. That information is right there at your fingertips that can help with that safety issues too. I think jump to the next slide, Rachel. And so we wanted to just take a second and talk a little bit more about our veterans treatment courts. Similar model to everything that we have just described, but what we know about military service members and veterans is that the individuals, we only have 5 existing, with 2 in the planning stages, but they're serving intimate partner violence, domestic violence cases, violent offenses, and we see that the reason for that is because of the military background and the training that they receive. And we are also seeing that increased risk of suicide. And so wrapping them up in those services, the PTSD, the trauma, the traumatic brain injury is important that they have a separate individualized program for veterans. They have mentors that are supporting them in the programs as well. But as it relates to the SCIP, from our knowledge and understanding really is that it is, I don't want to say it's more welcomed, but what we know, especially on the federal side, is that they are allowed to serve violent offenses and get federal funding for our veterans treatment courts explicitly because they know that that is the population that we're serving and that they would be excluded. And so I could talk more about this, which is why I think I'm having difficulty squeezing it all into one slide for veterans treatment court specifically, but it is something that could be, it may not be appropriate because a handful of our drug court programs may not serve those violent offense cases and have some of those exclusionary criterias, but the veterans treatment court could be something that would be more tailored to serving with this funding.
Okay, so what does all this mean? A few considerations we wanted to leave you with, and rest assured Rachel knows how to find us. We're happy to come back, share any information you'd like at any point. But if you were inclined to consider treatment courts as a potential eligible applicant for your grant program, things that we would probably encourage you to consider and pay specific attention to is making sure that those programs are really doing individualized case planning that is targeting their risk factors, violence risk factors, which can be distinct between the two, along with their clinical needs. So really looking at the whole human and what all of their needs are in an integrated form. Do they have a mechanism for swift responses? One of the beautiful things about treatment courts is what Danielle described, this team coming together, talking about an individual's progress or struggles, and then actually having a judicial interaction. And all of that happens on a weekly or biweekly basis. But guess what? There's a lot of days in between those different hearings. And if we're talking about an elevated community safety risk, we would encourage you to think through just how is the team going to communicate? What's their mechanism to respond if there are concerns, especially that are looking from a safety perspective, whether that be to the individual or to the public or victim. Full team representation feels incredibly important, just to say you're running a treatment court program, but in this specific context, I think we feel really strongly that you'd want to make sure you've got all of the players to the table. You need that balanced approach to make sure all of the right considerations are coming out through the supervision and support of that individual. You'd want to make sure that they have, I think, a really broad repertoire of interventions and resources to tap into. So just a couple of examples, thinking through like aggression replacement training, cognitive training, so cognitive behavioral interventions, especially thinking through addressing thinking errors, things that can lead to violence, et cetera. Then we also recognize that the individuals that are coming before the court with weapons or concerns with weapons, there's also concerns around suicidality. And so we'd want to make sure that the teams have ability to understanding of how to access crisis resources, but also some training around how to respond to suicidality when individuals are presenting that way in the program would be another consideration we'd encourage. We'd encourage paying special attention to community monitoring, home visits, contact restrictions. How is this individual doing with following the rules that are not only related to their treatment progress, but again, really come back to community safety? Are there things that need more attention than they may get through a standard probation track? And how is that playing out in the treatment court? Attention to victim safety and victims' rights. I'm sure I don't have to tell you all, but there's like a whole, I want to say it's a chapter, but at least a good section of the ORS. Victims actually have rights. And I think treatment court programs generally historically took crimes that didn't have a victim associated with them. Over time, that's changed pretty substantially. But if we're starting to think through the public safety lens even more in this context, would just want to be really sure that the team is thinking through keeping that victim safe, but also adhering to victims' rights. When do they have a voice in the actual process itself, and making sure to incorporate that appropriately. And then back to this emphasis on equity. Wonderful if we can get everybody in the door, but we need to make sure once they get into these programs that we have the right resources to serve and support them. Culturally specific resources in any given community are a great example of that, linguistically appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a few thoughts on that front. I'm going to shift real quickly to our last slide, just so you see both of our emails are here. Danielle and I are more than happy to connect with anybody with any questions. I'm going to go ahead and cut the screen share. I just saw a hand go up, and I want to make space for that.
Jess, I think you had your hand up. Is that?
I don't have a question specific to the program, though, so I can pause if someone else does.
Oh, okay. Does anybody have any questions for Rachel or Danielle? This was great. Thank you all.
Thank you for the time.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it. Jess, while I'm sharing my screen again, you can, whatever, if you have a question.
Yeah, just thanks. It was really interesting to learn about the treatment courts. I did not have that background, and just wanted to make sure I'm understanding the goal of these kind of broader presentations. Is it to help us understand potential opportunities that we can fund? Because I feel like there's a little bit of just missing context that, or is it more around learning from their experiences?
Yeah, so that is exactly where we're going right here.
Okay,
so
great.
Just kind of a reminder here that these are the funding priorities for this program. And so this, I don't know when the last time you all saw this slide, but I thought I would put it up here. So we've had a presentation on ERPOs. We just had a presentation on existing specialty courts, expanding existing specialty courts. There are other types of recovery courts that can be prioritized as well. And then any behavioral health deflection programs. So these are the priorities. And then the last one is the funding for law enforcement agencies to safely secure, store, track, and return relinquished firearms. Y'all have not had a presentation addressing that. We have actually reached out to a number of people and have not been able to find anybody to present on that. So if anybody knows anybody and would like to recommend them, that would be super helpful. And then also, I also wanted to show this slide as well. These are also some funding possibilities or examples. Laura, I saw your hand. Let me get through this and then I'll pause. So the community violence intervention programs, the 2 grant programs that we heard about today before the specialty court presentation, and then other law enforcement based programs and technology. So there's some examples there. So Jess, I hope that kind of answered your question about where we're going with this. And so far, those have been the presentations that you all have listened to or seen. And so the question today for next steps is really, is there anything else that you all would like to hear about? Do you feel like there is something missing between these 2 slides? Are there any additional topics that have not yet been covered? And the reason why I kind of need to ask this question is we've just gotten some guidance from NCJA about a deadline for this with the first allocation of funding. And so we kind of need to decide when we're going to finish with the informational meetings and move into that process of prioritizing at least that first allocation, that 22-23 allocation. It doesn't mean that if you choose to prioritize one of these that you can't fund others as those allocations comes. 2024 solicitation is opening soon. And so, we have funding through 2026, but that is the question that I posed to you all as a group based on what you've heard so far and what you heard today. Is there anything else that you feel like you need to hear about before we move into prioritizing funds? And I can show the next slide as well if you'd like to see that as some examples. Jess.
Sorry to keep asking questions. And do you have the deadline available that you can tell us of when that is?
It's the end of this fiscal year. So what that means for us is we have to, when we did the initial solicitation for the $3 million allocation, the program description was pretty broad because we didn't have any specifics. And so we just kind of made it very broad. What we have to do then is once you all prioritize what you want that allocation, Laura, I think, yes, that's correct. What you all want that allocation to be, we have to then modify that program description and kind of make that scope a little bit more specific. So that's kind of our timeline, is we need information from you as you've prioritized, like on what you are going to prioritize for that first allocation.
And then there'll be an RFP process. Do we need the deadline with the RFP process by that 9/30 date, or just
just the program approval. And the reason why is because the 24 allocation is coming out. And there are a number of states, we're not the only one, who have yet to have a program approved. And so they've kind of set that deadline so that essentially there's not money left on the table. We want to be able to say where that money has been prioritized and where it's going to go. And that's just the initial allocation. There is a $1.5 million allocation for 2024 and then all the way through 2026. So it's just that initial. So I guess that comes back to, do you all feel like you need another group? Do you need more information? Is there anything that you all feel like you are missing that we can organize? I think the goal at this point is to, depending on if you need more information or if you're going to move to the prioritization stage, would be to meet monthly until we have a decision made. And so we would then have a meeting sometime in March to start prioritizing or provide additional information to y'all. And this is also just kind of a reminder of what your responsibilities are and how it works. When you all prioritize, we present it to BJA. BJA can approve it or send it back for reconsideration. So we do need a little bit of time to be able to go to that process and then identifying those subawardees. So that would be the next step. So any thoughts on this process? Laura.
Yeah, Rachel, could you go back one slide? Yeah, I'm curious about domestic violence protection order support. And have we heard about that? Maybe I missed.
Are you?
Yeah, your first.
Oh, this one?
No, the first bullet on the slide that was just up. This domestic violence protection.
The big one.
I'm just not clear what the context is on that, and that's just showing my ignorance more than anything. But I didn't know if maybe we could call in some folks to provide some more context around that. Okay. Do other folks, is that just me, or do other folks feel like they need that as well? Because I'm also just happy to do some research.
I mean, I'm happy to try to schedule something for next month if that's something that you feel is appropriate.
Is that just something, is that written instead of the extreme risk protection order? Or is that distinct?
I think it's in addition to. I think there's, yeah.
That's the additional, okay.
Yeah. The ERPOs are considered a priority, so they're on that previous slide. So if y'all need me to go between slides, I couldn't fit all of this on one slide, so I can go back and forth if you need to. So Jeff, I think you had your hand up as well.
Thanks. And this kind of goes along with what Laura was asking. We've got a lot of information over about the past 6 months, and I'm sure we were delivered all of the slides and summaries of the presentations since then. But a big ask is to then remember and review and go back over and prioritize those. And that may be just a necessary part of a meeting, is a brief review of stuff we heard in September and October. I thought today was again very insightful and informative, and we actually have, I think, a tough job to sort through all of these great programs that we assume are going to apply for some funding and make some tough decisions. But sort of with what Laura was saying, I think we talked about, I know we talked about ERPO's first meeting, and it was very informative. And but that bullet, protection order support, I think could be pretty broad, but also if there are applicants that are wanting to provide that support with some funding, I think it would be good to at least review, if not get more information. That's all I got.
Okay. Jess, you had your hand up. I don't mean to call on you if you don't want to talk, but just want to make sure.
I was just going to say that we haven't heard from the other protection orders, and I think fully understanding the protection orders with ERPOs and some of the gaps would be helpful, including what sort of training law enforcement receives for the other protection orders versus for ERPOs. Okay. But I wonder if we could move forward with thinking through some initial allocations just on timeline, knowing there's more funding available. So I wonder if there's kind of a both and approach.
Yeah, so we can do a couple of things. So for March, if y'all are good with, you know, a month, I feel like a monthly meeting is kind of necessary from here on out. And I will say also, when you all decide to start making decisions and actually prioritize, we are going to need quorum. And so if that is something that you want to start doing next month, you know, we can do that, but we do need quorum. Quorum for this group is 10 people. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. And we can communicate that out. But for next month, if you'd like, we can try and get somebody for protection orders to expand that a little bit and see where those gaps are beyond the ERPOs, and then do kind of like what Jeff was talking about, an overview, a broad overview with kind of the highlights or the points of all of the presentations that you've heard so far. Would that be helpful? The other thing that we could do is send potentially, and I think I have a fellow staff member here who's kind of been, Shelby, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we can send out all of the presentations, PowerPoints as well. Is that correct, Shelby?
Yes, I can certainly send those out.
Yeah, so we can also send those out so you have, like, you know what you've listened to already. We can also do some sort of review next month as well, and then shoot for April to start prioritizing and kind of figure out, at least for this first allocation. And just a reminder, if you pick one thing for this first allocation, it doesn't mean that you can't fund other things as the money comes through. So we can kind of have a phase 1 and a phase 2 conversation. So is everybody okay with that timeline? So one more informational meeting with the protection orders, and then kind of a broad overview of all of the presentations. We'll make sure you get them. So if you do have any questions or want to discuss those things, we could do that in March. And then in April, we'll kind of start with the prioritization of that first allocation. Okay, I got a couple thumbs up. So, okay. Then that is where we'll go. Okay. I understand that it is 3:30. I do just, for sake of public meeting, I just want to make sure that any members of the public do have the ability to comment if they would like to at this time. And just please keep your comments short, and just reminder that we are not at this point able to answer any questions. And so just kind of leave them as statements. And I do believe we have one. Liddy, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I will keep it brief. My name is Liddy Ballard from Brady, and just want to stamp something that was named in the chat. We really support the use of burn skip funding for secure storage public awareness campaigns. We stand ready to support the commission however we can. Our End Family Fire program is fully focused on an apolitical approach to changing behavior around firearm storage. And so highly recommend the consideration of funding towards safe firearm storage. And Jess has our information, but also happy to provide information wherever necessary.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, that is all for today. I appreciate y'all being here. I know everybody's busy because session is happening and everything is chaotic and all the things. Also, it's already the end of February, which is just wild to me. But yeah, we will do a doodle poll for March and try to get all of it scheduled, and then go for April for prioritization and move along so that we can meet this deadline. So thank you for your patience with me as I kind of get acclimated to this program. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next month. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.